When I turned 64, I never imagined this would be how my life would unfold. I was Susan Miller, a mother and grandmother, who had spent her life taking care of everyone else. My children, my husband, and even my grandchildren had always been the center of my world. But that day my world turned upside down. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, looked at me with a cold, calculating stare across the dinner table. "You'll get nothing, Susan. Nothing at all from this." Her words hit me like a slap to the face. I could hardly breathe, trying to process what she had just said. The look in her eyes said it all. She had no intention of treating me like family. As I sat there trying to maintain my composure, I felt my chest tighten. I had always done everything for my family. I cooked, I cleaned, I gave advice, and most of all, I loved them unconditionally. But now, after all these years, it was clear. They didn't care for me the way I had cared for them. I looked at my son, Mark, sitting beside Rachel, but his eyes were distant. He didn't speak up. He didn't even meet my gaze. The silence in the room was deafening. I was no longer the mother, the one they turned to. I was just the old woman who had outlived her usefulness. My hands trembled slightly as I put down my fork, trying to steady myself. I wanted to cry, to shout, but I stayed calm. I smiled, though it felt forced. This wasn't the life I had imagined for myself at 64. This wasn't what I had worked so hard for. Yet there I was, fighting to keep the tears from falling. "Don't worry," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I don't need anything from you." I could feel Rachel's eyes on me, as if daring me to do something, anything. But I didn't. Not yet. I had learned over the years that sometimes, silence could be more powerful than any words. I knew I had to be patient. They thought they had one. But I wasn't ready to let them get away with this. Not yet. I spent the rest of the evening in a haze, pretending that everything was fine, even though inside I was falling apart. Rachel's words echoed in my head, and every time I thought about them it felt like a sharp sting. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty. I couldn't stop thinking about how my family had turned their backs on me, especially Rachel. She had been so sweet when she first married Mark, pretending to care about me, pretending to be part of the family. But now it was clear. She only cared about one thing, money. I had always known that she wasn't fond of me, but to hear those words come out of her mouth, to have her say that I would get nothing, it broke something inside of me. I looked at Mark sitting across from me, trying to make himself busy with his phone, avoiding eye contact. Was he really so blind? Did he truly not see what was happening? My mind raced. I had spent years giving everything I had for this family, and now at the age of 64, I was being discarded like some old furniture that no longer served a purpose. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect, love, and decency. As I sat there, I realized something. Rachel and Mark thought they could push me aside, that I was too old to fight back, too weak to stand up for myself. But they were wrong. I had been silent for too long, holding my tongue to keep the peace, to maintain the family's image. But that was over. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. I was going to find a way to turn this around, to take back my dignity in my life. I didn't know how yet, but I would. My hand clenched around my fork, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of determination. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I walked into the kitchen and began making breakfast, though I could barely stomach the idea of food. The silence in the house was deafening. I had lived here for so many years, and yet now it felt like a place I no longer recognized. I knew that I couldn't let Rachel's words define me. I needed to take control of my life again. I had raised Mark, cared for him, and loved him, but now I was being treated like I didn't matter. That thought alone was enough to fuel my determination. As I sat down with a cup of coffee, I began to think about my options. I couldn't stay here any longer. Not in a house where I felt invisible, unwanted. But where would I go? I had no family left to turn to, no one except my own children, and they had made it clear that they didn't care. But I wasn't about to let that stop me. I was strong. I had to be. I had spent my whole life making sacrifices for them, and now it was time to think about myself. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I had to do it. I had worked hard all my life to build a home, a family, and I wasn't going to let Rachel or anyone else take that from me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need them at all. I had myself, and that was enough. The first step was finding a lawyer, someone who could help me understand my rights and what I could do about the situation. I didn't want to confront Rachel just yet, but I knew that eventually I would. I had to be smart about this. No more acting out of emotion, no more letting them walk all over me. It was time to plan my next move carefully with precision. And so, with a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in years, I set my coffee cup down and picked up the phone. It was time to take back what was mine. The day after I made that call, I found myself sitting in a lawyer's office, my hands resting on the table, trying to keep them from shaking. The walls around me felt cold, but I had to be strong. The lawyer, a woman named Karen, went over the details of my situation. As she spoke, I realized how little I had known about my own rights. I had trusted my family to look after me, to make sure I had everything I needed in my old age, but it was clear now that they had other plans. Karen explained the legal process, the options available to me, and what steps we would take next. It was a lot to absorb, but I listened carefully, making mental notes. When the meeting ended, I walked out of her office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The world outside seemed brighter, the air fresher. I knew that what I had to do next wouldn't be easy, but I felt ready. I was no longer going to allow Rachel or Mark to control my fate. The next few days were a blur. I met with a financial advisor to go over my savings and what I could afford. I looked at rental properties, trying to imagine what my life would be like in a new place. It was all so foreign to me. I had always been the one who made sure everything was taken care of, the one who took care of others. But now it was time for me to take care of myself. I found a small apartment on the outskirts of town, not too far from the house I had once shared with Mark and Rachel, but far enough that I wouldn't have to face them every day. The apartment was modest, but it was mine. I signed the lease and spent the next few days packing up my things. As I packed, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. This was my home, the place where I had raised my family, where I had spent so many years of my life. But I knew I couldn't stay. Not in a house where I was treated like an afterthought. I had to move on, even if it meant leaving behind the life I had known. The day I moved into my new apartment was a mixture of emotions. I felt a sense of freedom, but also a deep sadness. As I unpacked my things, I realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would be in control. And that felt like a small victory. It had been a few weeks since I moved into my new apartment, and the quiet solitude had become both a blessing and a curse. At first, I thought I would miss the sounds of a bustling household, the laughter, the chaos, the feeling of being surrounded by family. But now all I could hear was my own thoughts, echoing off the walls. I had no one to talk to, no one to share my day with. But oddly, it didn't feel as bad as I thought it would. In the silence, I could finally hear myself again. For the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to put on a brave face for Rachel or Mark. I could simply be Susan, just Susan, without the weight of expectations hanging over me. It was during one of those quiet evenings that I received a call from Karen, my lawyer. "Susan, we need to talk," she said, her voice serious. "I've received some troubling news." I felt my stomach tighten. "What is it?" I asked, my heart suddenly racing. "It's about the house," she continued. "Rachel is trying to sell it. She's already started the process." My mind raced. The house, the one I had built a life in with Mark, the one where we raised our children, where I had spent decades of my life, was being sold without my knowledge, without my consent. The anger boiled up inside me, but I kept my voice steady. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We fight," Karen said firmly. "I'll help you stop the sale, but we need to act quickly." I knew then that I wasn't going to let them take everything from me without a fight. This was my home, my memories, my life. I wasn't going to let Rachel destroy it. With Karen's help, I began to prepare for the legal battle ahead. I wasn't going to back down. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and I knew I might lose, but I also knew that I had nothing left to lose. I had to stand up for myself, for everything I had worked for. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready. The days following my conversation with Karen were a blur. My life had become a whirlwind of meetings, paperwork, and legal jargon. I wasn't used to this world of law and contracts, but I was determined to learn. Karen had given me a clear plan of action. We would fight to stop the sale of the house, and we would make sure that Rachel didn't get away with what she was trying to do. As we worked through the details, I began to feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. It wasn't just about the house. It was about my dignity, my right to be treated with respect. I couldn't let Rachel and Mark think they could just walk all over me. I had to make sure they knew I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of betrayal as I thought about everything I had done for them over the years. I had been a good mother, a good mother-in-law. I had given everything for my family, and this was how they repaid me. The anger surged inside me again, but I pushed it aside. I couldn't afford to let emotions cloud my judgment. The next step was to send a formal letter to Rachel and Mark, notifying them of the legal action I was taking. It wasn't an easy thing to do, but it was necessary. I needed them to understand that this wasn't just a game. This was my life. The day I sent the letter, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done everything I could. The rest was up to the law. I didn't expect Rachel and Mark to just give up, but I knew that I had done what was right. I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. The battle had only just begun, and I was ready. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about the future. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let anyone dictate my life anymore. I had spent too many years living for others. Now it was time to live for myself. The days after I sent the letter were filled with an uneasy quiet. I spent my time in my new apartment, going through the motions of everyday life, trying to keep myself busy. The phone calls stopped, the texts stopped. Mark and Rachel didn't reach out. It was as if they were pretending nothing had happened. But I wasn't pretending. I knew this was only the beginning, and I wasn't about to let them win. A few days later, Karen called me again. "Susan, we've received a response," she said, her tone unreadable. "They want to meet with you." My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting. Was this a negotiation? A last-ditch attempt to make me back down? When and where? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "At their lawyer's office tomorrow at 10 a.m. I agreed, though my mind was racing. The thought of facing Rachel and Mark again made me feel uneasy, but I couldn't back out now. The next morning I put on my best suit, the one I used to wear to family events, and stood in front of the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She looked older, worn down by years of sacrifice, but there was something different about her now. A strength. I took a deep breath and left for the meeting. When I walked into the lawyer's office, Mark and Rachel were already sitting there, both looking tense. Rachel's eyes narrowed when she saw me, but she didn't say anything. Mark, on the other hand, gave me a tight-lipped smile, but there was no warmth in it. We sat down, and the lawyer, a man I didn't recognize, began speaking. He went over the terms of the settlement they were offering me. Rachel and Mark had decided that they were willing to let me keep some of the family heirlooms, but the house, my house, was off the table. Felt like a slap in the face. I listened to every word, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there trying to hold my ground. When the lawyer finished, I finally spoke. "I'm not interested in your offer," I said calmly. "I'll see you in court." Rachel's face flushed with anger, but I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Mark, on the other hand, looked shocked. He wasn't used to me standing up for myself. "You don't want to do this, Susan," he said, his voice strained. "It's not worth it." "It's worth everything," I replied, my voice steady. "And I'll fight for it." I stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. As I walked out of the office, I felt a surge of confidence. I wasn't backing down. This was my life, my home, and I wasn't going to let them take it from me. The days after the meeting were long and tense. The silence between me and my son, Mark, grew unbearable. Rachel didn't reach out either. Felt like I was living in a world where I didn't belong anymore. But I refused to let the weight of it all break me. I had made a choice, and I was standing by it. The following week, the court date arrived. I had prepared myself for the battle ahead, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of walking into that courtroom. The room was cold, and the walls seemed to close in on me. I sat at the lawyer's desk, looking at Mark and Rachel on the other side of the room. Rachel, as always, wore a smug expression, her arms crossed, her gaze cold. Mark looked different. There was a hint of guilt in his eyes, though he quickly masked it. I could tell he was uncomfortable. He wasn't used to seeing me like this, strong, unwavering, ready to fight for what was mine. The lawyer for the other side spoke first, listing their arguments, their reasons why they believed they were entitled to everything. It was the same old story. They were younger, they had more energy, and they deserved to be the ones to carry the legacy of the house forward. But as I listened, something inside me snapped. I couldn't let them reduce my life to a set of numbers or a convenience. I had given so much of myself to this family, and they thought they could take it all away from me. I wasn't going to let that happen. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up slowly, taking a moment to steady myself. I wasn't going to be intimidated. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady. This house isn't just a building. It's a home. A home filled with memories of my husband, my children, and everything I've worked for. I'm not here to fight for things that don't matter. I'm here because this is my life. I paused for a moment, letting my words sink in. I could feel Mark's gaze on me, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes, regret, maybe? But I didn't let it distract me. I don't want their money, I don't want their property. I want the respect I deserve. And I want my place in this family, not just as a bystander, but as the woman who gave everything for it. I sat back down, my heart pounding. The room was silent. For a moment, and I knew I had made an impact. It was one small victory, but it felt huge. I had spoken my truth, and no matter what happened next, I knew I had done the right thing. The fight was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next. The days after the court hearing felt like an eternity. I couldn't shake the weight of the decision I had made, and I couldn't stop thinking about the look in Mark's eyes. It wasn't the same cold, dismissive gaze I had seen for months. No, there was something softer now, almost like regret. Rachel, however, remained unchanged. Her expressions were still the same, sharp, calculating, and different. I spent my days in my small apartment, organizing my belongings and trying to regain some semblance of peace. But my thoughts were consumed by what would happen next. I knew that I had done everything I could, but deep down, I wasn't sure if I was ready for the consequences. I hadn't heard from Karen after the hearing, and the silence was unsettling. I had hoped to feel relief after standing up for myself, but instead, I felt like I was waiting for something to shift. It wasn't until a week later that Karen called. "Susan, we have some news," she said, her voice much more upbeat than before. "The judge ruled in your favor." I froze. For a moment I couldn't process the words. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The house is yours," Karen explained. "They can't sell it, and Rachel's plans to take everything are now blocked." A flood of emotions hit me all at once, relief, disbelief, and yes, even triumph. But as I sat there absorbing the news, another thought crept into my mind. This wasn't just about the house. This wasn't just about the property, the money, or the legal win. This was about my life, my dignity, and the years I had spent being pushed aside. The fact that I had stood up for myself, fought for what was rightfully mine, felt like the real victory. I knew that I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that courtroom. I had changed. And in that moment I realized something. No matter what happened with Rachel or Mark, no matter how much they tried to undermine me, I had my own strength. I had found it within myself to fight, to refuse to be silenced. And that was something they could never take away. After receiving the news that the judge had ruled in my favor, a sense of calm washed over me, but it didn't last long. The victory felt almost surreal, like it had happened to someone else. For years I had been the quiet one, the one who kept my head down and played my part in the family. But now, the quiet woman who had spent so long being dismissed and overlooked had stood up for herself. It was as if a new chapter in my life was beginning, but I wasn't sure what it would look like. The victory in court was a relief, but there was still the aftermath to deal with. Rachel's cold demeanor hadn't changed. She still avoided me, and I could tell she was frustrated by the outcome. Mark, on the other hand, was different. He was starting to show signs of regret. There were moments when he would look at me almost like he was seeing me for the first time. It wasn't the same distance I had felt from him before. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was confusion, but I knew that something had shifted. I didn't know where this would lead, but I could feel that things were beginning to change. My life was no longer dictated by their expectations. I didn't need them to approve of me or my decisions. As I sat in my apartment, I took a deep breath and looked around at the space I had created for myself. It was small, but it was mine. It felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could finally be myself. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was a reminder of my strength, of the steps I had taken to claim my independence. I wasn't just living in a house. I was living a life I had fought for. The battle wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more moments where I would need to stand my ground. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't afraid of what Rachel or Mark thought. And most importantly, I wasn't afraid of standing up for myself. The woman who had once been silenced had found her voice, and nothing could take that away from me. Weeks passed since the ruling, and though the legal battle was over, the emotional scars were still fresh. It was clear that things between me and Mark had changed, but I wasn't sure if it was for the better. He had begun reaching out more, calling me on the phone, and even stopping by the apartment every now and then, asking if I needed anything. His gestures were small, but they were there. Rachel, however, remained distant, still angry over the court decision, but there was nothing I could do about that. I had learned long ago that I couldn't force anyone to love me or respect me. Mark, on the other hand, seemed to be slowly realizing the extent of his own role in all of this. I watched him change bit by bit. The awkward silence between us, which had stretched for months, had started to fade. He wasn't as defensive as he once was. At first, I had resisted getting too close to him again. After everything that had happened, I didn't know if I could forgive him, but something told me that it was time to try. I knew that I needed to heal, not just for me, but for the sake of what was left of my family. One evening Mark called asking if we could meet. I hesitated for a moment but agreed. We met at a small cafe in town. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, but there was something different this time. He looked at me like he had never looked at me before, as if he was finally seeing me, the woman who had given him everything. "Mom, I just want to say I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I know I haven't been the best son. I never realized how much you had sacrificed for all of us." Hearing him say those words was a moment I never thought would come. For so long I had felt like I was invisible to him, like my sacrifices had meant nothing. But now it seemed like he was finally seeing the truth. I didn't know how to respond at first. A part of me wanted to hold on to my anger, but another part of me realized that healing would never come if I didn't let go of the past. "I know you're sorry, Mark," I said quietly, "but I need more than just an apology. I need to know that you're going to be there for me, not just when it's convenient." He nodded, and I could see the sincerity in his eyes. "I will be," he promised. As we sat there talking for the first time in months, I realized that forgiveness wasn't about letting go of the past. It was about choosing to move forward. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew that I was ready to find peace, even if it meant rebuilding my relationship with my son, one step at a time. The months that followed the court case were filled with slow but steady changes. I spent my days in my small apartment, learning how to enjoy my own company. I wasn't used to being alone, but over time I started to appreciate the quiet, the space to think, and most importantly, the freedom. I wasn't living for anyone else anymore. I was living for me. Mark continued to reach out, and our conversations grew more meaningful. There were still moments when I felt the weight of everything that had happened, but I knew we were both trying. We were rebuilding our relationship piece by piece. I saw him making an effort, and that meant more to me than any apology. One afternoon, Mark invited me over to his house. It felt strange walking back into the place I had once called home, but this time it was different. The tension that had once filled the walls was gone. It was just the two of us really talking for the first time in years. He apologized again, not just for his actions but for his silence, for not seeing me, for not being the son I needed him to be. His words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't the apology I had imagined, but it was the one I needed. "I want to be here for you, Mom," he said quietly. "I know I can never make up for what happened, but I want to try." I didn't know what to say at first. I had spent so long carrying the weight of my own hurt, trying to make sense of everything, that hearing him say those words left me speechless. But then I found myself smiling, genuinely smiling for the first time in a long time. I didn't need him to fix everything. I just needed him to be present. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking not about the past but about the future. For the first time in years I felt a sense of hope. Hope that things could be better, hope that we could rebuild not just the house we had once lived in but the family we had once been. As I left his house that day, I realized that the hardest part was over. The fighting was behind me, and now it was time to move forward, with or without the things I had lost. I had found my voice, and that was more than enough. I wasn't going to let the past define me anymore. The woman I had once been had fought for what she deserved, and now she was ready for what came next.